People ask me all the time how I got into radio. But my situation is unique. I was born into it. Not everybody gets into radio the same way. I started writing Pepper's story. I found myself asking the same question. How did she get into radio? Not how did she get her first job? Not how did she become successful? How did the spark begin? And that answer actually surprised me. It wasn't a radio station. It wasn't a career decision. It wasn't even radio at first. It was freedom. The summer of 1975. Pepper is 15. Her cousin Ginger is 17, and she's got a driver's license. The world suddenly gets bigger. Roller rinks, cruising Van Nuys Boulevard, going to the beach, amusement parks. The freedom to go somewhere simply because it sounds fun. And as I was writing these scenes, I realized Pepper wasn't falling in love with radio. She was falling in love with the experiences. Music, energy, community, shared moments. At the roller rink, she realizes how much music changes the mood of the entire room. On Van Nuys Boulevard, they're listening to KHJ and the Real Don Steele, listening to some 70s music, as she becomes fascinated with live radio promotions and the way a DJ can gather complete strangers into a shared experience. She doesn't know it, but she's collecting clues. She just knows that she's paying attention. The ideas became even more meaningful to me because of something that happened years ago in my life. After my brother died in 2015, I was working on a lot of mental health programs for my clients. And I was also grieving. At the same time, I was grieving my brother. But what happened was I had gotten a new car at the time, and it was a lease. And I was listening to Sirius Radio or Sirius XM because, that's what happens when you get a leased car. They give you 6 months of Sirius for free. I'm a terrestrial radio girl, so I don't normally subscribe for these services, but, it was free, so why not? So I'm listening to 70s on 7. And I was hearing songs that I hadn't heard in so long, including Joy to the World from Three Dog Night. And that song triggered a memory in me about when we had our radio station. We were an oldies station playing 70s music. And it was just one of the songs that my brother would use in the morning show. It reminded me of our times running the radio station. And the music started doing its job. And that's when I started really studying neuroscience, neuroplasticity. They came up with License to Be Badass and the Badass soundtrack. And I want to know what songs show up on your Badass soundtrack. That's part of my Badass certification class. And we'll get into Badass later. But I wanted to talk about music and how I went back to 1975 all over again. And that's what reminded me of it, is that I knew I had these 70s music soundtracks saved. And so I went back to the 70s as I'm writing these scenes, and I'm listening to all this music and creating a soundtrack just for Pepper alone. Because these aren't just memories, they're feelings, they're moments, they're people, and they're places. And that experience, driving around in my car, listening to 70s on 7 and recalling memories with my brother Brad, is how the Badass soundtrack was inspired. It's a collection of songs that instantly reconnects us to meaningful moments in our lives. And everyone's Badass soundtrack is going to be completely different. Mine is not going to be the same as yours. Yours is not going to be the same as mine. Music is so powerful that way. It doesn't just remind us of what happened. It reminds us of who we were. And nostalgia is definitely a mood booster, which helps your productivity and creativity and helps you function in a daily life. So if anyone says you don't want to live in the past by listening to or paying attention to nostalgia, just remember this. It's actually stirring up these physiology in your brain, the biochemistry. It's stirring up good feelings, which helps you focus on creativity, positivity, and getting through the day. So nostalgia is really a mood booster, and music is the ultimate psychologist. And as I've been writing Pepper's story, I realized that's exactly what was happening to her. She didn't know where radio would eventually take her. She was simply following the things that made her feel alive. Looking back, we call them clues. And at the time, it just felt like summer. So here's what I want you to remember. Sometimes music remembers parts of us before we're ready to remember them ourselves. And sometimes the things that capture our attention are quietly pointing us toward who we're becoming. Next week, I'll share something I've learned about as a writer, therapist, and traveler. Nothing is wasted if you're paying attention. If you enjoyed this conversation, I'd appreciate if you'd like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might enjoy it too. And if you'd like to go deeper, I invite you to join me in the Courtyard on Substack. That's where I share the writing journey behind the Radio and Records Cafe trilogy, along with reflections on creativity, leadership, resilience, travel, and the stories that shape our lives. You'll find the link below, and I'd love to have you join us there.